Thank you very much for inviting me. This is my first visit to Turkey, and I'm very privileged to be able to enjoy your wonderful cultural heritage, your amazing hospitality, and your food. I think your cuisine is now my favorite. We don't get real Turkish cuisine in America. We need to. It's absolutely wonderful. So I don't need to tell this audience that we are in the midst of a childhood obesity epidemic. And it's a really complicated problem. We're not going to come up with any quick, simple solutions because we start out with a biologic genetic susceptibility. And then we live in an environment that is very conducive to overeating and getting little activity. Our families and schools and communities are often not supportive enough of what needs to be done to help children eat healthy and to move more. I'm very pleased to hear what the minister had to say and what the foundation is doing to help counter these kinds of effects. And of course, we have individual behaviors, eating and physical activity, that we can manage. And what I'm going to do today is talk about eating behavior and some simple strategies that we can employ to try to get children to eat better diets. There are a number of possible intervention points that might help prevent childhood obesity. We don't have hard data on any of this, so we need a lot more research in this area. The clearest relationship to childhood obesity is parental weight. If the parents are overweight, the children are quite likely to be susceptible to obesity. But the parental diet, eating behaviors, their gestational weight gain, and how they feed the infants early on all can help to prevent obesity. The child feeding practices, what they eat, is also critical. When they start eating solid foods, the fruits and vegetables they consume, and that's going to be a big focus of my talk today, the density of calories in the foods they eat, how much they eat away from home, the portions of the foods they eat, how often they snack, and restrictive practices, not allowing them to have foods they enjoy, can actually make them like the foods more and want the foods more. So this really emphasizes the message of the foundation, balance, and that's what we have to figure out how to work into our current environment. So what we do know about children's eating behavior has come very recently. We know that bigger portions of food lead to greater intake. And we know that lowering the density of calories in food can help to reduce energy intake. And this is what I'm going to be focusing on today. Just about everybody is affected by the portions of foods they're served. We've been looking for individual differences in susceptibility in kids, and all of the children we're testing, pretty much the more you give them, the more they eat. And in this early study, we varied the size of pasta that we served to children at lunch. And you can see that as the portion size grew, the children ate more food. Since that study, there have been many other studies looking at the effects of portion size of a number of different types of foods. Pasta has an undefined shape, so it's hard to judge the portion. So that, the bigger the portion, the more you eat. But other foods like sandwiches, pieces of pizza, the more you get, the more you eat. Beverages, also portion size affects intake. Packaged snacks. This works whether you're in the lab where we test people or in restaurants. But there's some good news. The bigger portions of fruits and vegetables can also increase intake. So what we're trying to figure out in our studies is how to leverage that effect to get children to eat more fruits and vegetables. So these studies on portion size have caught the attention of many policymakers. So I want to just show you a little bit of the public messages that are going out in the States. These are posters that the Centers for Disease Control have posted on their website, showing how portions have increased from the 1950s to now. Obviously, they're getting very big, and then in the one poster, they speculate that by the year 2050, perhaps a hamburger will be as big as our head. I mean, this is just a way to try to get attention that portions are big. Last year, the World Health Organization suggested some behavioral interventions to moderate the effect of portion size in children. For example, to teach children to focus on internal hunger and satiety cues. There's some evidence that perhaps children are better at regulating their intake than adults, but I think some of the data I'm going to show you today indicates that certainly by the age of 3, that's not the case. Children are very prone to overeating in response to environmental cues. Allowing children to serve themselves is supposed to teach them about appropriate portions, and even using smaller sized plates perhaps can help. The problem with all of these suggestions, they sound excellent and they're good advice, but there are no data to show that any of them work. The last one, improve caretakers' knowledge of appropriate portions, is particularly problematic because I think most of us, even health professionals, are not very clear about what appropriate portions are. And obviously an appropriate portion for a 3-year-old might be quite different from a very active 8-year-old. So it's very challenging to convey the messages that we need to. The dietary guidelines in 2010 in America also prominently emphasized the importance of portion control. These are the messages they put out for consumers. Their top message was enjoy your food, but eat less, and to avoid oversized portions. The problem with the eat less message is, first of all, people don't want to be told to eat less. It's a negative message. We need more positive messaging. Plus, if you simply eat less of everything, you can see that if you go from 800 calories and just cut everything on your plate, you're going to have a plate that's half empty. And people don't like that. We tend to know how much food we should eat at a meal. We learn that over time. And so people with a plate half empty are going to feel hungry and deprived. But you don't have to have a half empty plate when you're cutting calories. If you cut back on the higher calorie density foods, the foods that pack a lot of calories into each bite, and give bigger portions of your lower calorie density foods, particularly your vegetables, your fruits, you can have a full plate and you will have a very nutritious meal. And you can manage your calories. So the key is to reduce the calorie density or the energy density. And Dr. Dranowski this morning already introduced you to energy density. So let's just think about how you can reduce energy density. The fat reduction can be effective because fat packs 9 calories per gram, twice as many calories in each bite as protein and carbohydrates. But as we heard from Dr. Willett this morning, we certainly don't want to be cutting back too far on the healthy fats. So if we cut fat, we need to emphasize the unhealthier fats. The thing about cutting fat too much is fat makes food taste good. So it's a balance. I think often we get fat we don't need to make food tasty. So we need to figure out where to cut it, where we won't miss the nutrients and the pleasure. Sugar reduction can have a moderate influence, but we don't eat so much sugar that it's going to have a big impact on overall calorie density. Extra fiber can have a small effect. Again, we don't eat a lot of fiber relative to the rest of the food, so that's not going to have a big impact. As Adam said this morning, water is the main way that you can vary the calorie density of foods. Water adds weight and volume to food, but no calories. So in particular, your fruits and vegetables are giving you much bigger portions for your calories because they're adding the water content. And I'm going to show you how that affects intake. It can have really a profound effect on how much you eat if you do as our dietary guidance, and I think your plate in Turkey is also emphasizing increasing the proportion of fruits and vegetables on the plate. We have to ask, does this have a big impact on how much people eat? Of course, it would improve the diet quality. So as with most of what we know about eating behavior in kids, there are very few studies on how changing the proportions of foods on the plate actually affects intake behavior. So we've done several studies in preschool children. All of the studies that I'm going to tell you about are in 3 to 5-year-old children. And we test them in their normal school environment, eating in their usual situation. So these studies are pretty representative of what would happen in the children's school environment. So in this study, we have a pasta and a vegetable and a fruit. And when we doubled the size of the fruit and kept the other foods the same size, the children ate about 70% more fruit. So with fruit, increasing the amount on the plate really worked very effectively. Of course, in America, the most challenging food to get children to eat more of are vegetables. Kids have a real problem with vegetables. It's a shame. But the doubling of the portion size of vegetables has inconsistent effects. In one study, it didn't have much of an effect. In another, we got a 37% increase in vegetable intake by doubling the portion. The key here is palatability. If the vegetables taste good relative to the other foods that they are offered, then they're going to eat more. It makes sense, but this is the only data we have actually showing that. So in American preschool, they serve the vegetables steamed with no butter, salt, or anything. And not surprisingly, the children don't find them very tasty. So we need to figure out how to make them more appealing. Another way you can increase the proportion of vegetables in the diet is to give them to kids when they're hungry. So at snack time, in these 2 studies, we varied the amount of vegetables that we gave to children at the start of a meal as their first course, so with no competing foods. So in one study, we varied the amount of carrots that we gave, and the bigger the portion, the more carrots the kids ate. And then tomato soup, again, the same type of finding. The bigger the portion, the more vegetables the children consume through the soup. So this is an easy strategy that parents and caregivers can use with kids to get them to eat more vegetables. In America, as I said, kids don't like vegetables very much, and the food industry, through some of their ads, has reinforced that children shouldn't like vegetables. So here's an ad for a pasta sauce. Shush, don't mention the vegetables. Kids will never know that this is loaded with vegetables. So we were wondering if you actually add vegetables so that kids don't know about them to popular dishes, will that increase vegetable intake? I mean, it may seem an obvious thing, but we didn't know until we did it. So what we did here is we, over a whole day, to the main dish at the meal, we blended in extra vegetables. And this reduces the calorie density of the food. So here we have a bread at breakfast. It's a sweet bread with extra squash or zucchini. At lunch, we pureed broccoli, cauliflower, and tomato. And for dinner, we added extra cauliflower and, again, squash. And notice for the lunch and dinner, we're also offering vegetables as a side dish, because clearly by increasing the amount of vegetable in the main dish, we don't want them to not eat the vegetables as the side and get the taste of the real vegetables. So what we found is as we increased the vegetable content and reduced the calorie density, the children ate more vegetables. With the largest amount of pureed vegetables, the children increased their vegetable intake by over 100%, so that all of the children in this study were meeting the daily recommended requirements for vegetable. Really an astounding effect. This was very effective, and eating more vegetables in the main dish did not affect intake of the vegetable side dishes. So this is a win-win. We also found that increasing the vegetable content of the main dish and reducing the calorie density reduced energy intake with the largest vegetable addition by 11%. So this was also a very effective strategy to help children moderate their daily energy intake. So, as I said, I would never say that this is the only thing that you should do, because clearly children need to experience the delicious tastes and flavors of vegetables, but this can work really well. Now, I've talked about portion size and energy density independently, but when we're eating, these two properties of foods are changing together. So we wanted to see how they combine when children are eating very typical foods to affect how much they eat. So what we've done in this study is all of the children are served with all 6 lunches a week apart. And we had 3 different portions. So when we're increasing the portion size, all of the foods increase in portion size. So the 100% portion size is a usual portion. It's plenty of food. And then we would increase portions of everything by 50% or 100%. And we had 2 different energy densities of the foods. And the way we varied it is we had grilled chicken compared to fried chicken. We had pasta with less fat or more fat, broccoli, peas, unsweetened applesauce, sweetened applesauce, lower fat milk, and higher fat milk. And the smallest portion of the low calorie density meal had 455 calories. That's plenty of calories for a 3 to 5-year-old. I suppose if you tried to guess how many calories the biggest portion of the higher energy dense food, you would probably be too low, because that meal has almost 1,300 calories. And to me, these meals don't look that different. I think many caregivers would not discriminate between these meals. But when you look at what the children ate in terms of their energy, you'll see that there is a portion size effect, both with the lower calorie density foods and the higher calorie density foods. There's also, very strikingly, a big effect on intake of the calorie density. So when you look at the combined effects of portion size and energy density, the children, when you compare the lowest portion of the low calorie density food to the biggest portion of the high energy dense food, ate 80% more with the higher, bigger portions. 175 calories, which in a 3 to 5-year-old is an enormous effect. I mean, these effects really are kind of mind-blowing. This is not published yet. This is a doctoral student of mine has just finished this. And I'll say no individual differences. We tested 120 children, and this response is very robust. So we don't have a lot of long-term data on energy density and portion size, but our 2010 Dietary Guidelines Committee did publish an evidence-based report where they found there was moderately strong evidence from methodologically rigorous longitudinal cohort studies in both children and adolescents to suggest there's a positive association between dietary energy or calorie density and increased adiposity. So what can we do? What do these straightforward, pretty simple studies tell us about what we can do to improve children's diets and lower their energy intake? First of all, we can use portion size strategically. Portion size does not have to always be bad. If we serve large portions of vegetables, fruits, and other lower calorie density foods, broth-based soups, things like that, we can improve their diets. And we need to find strategies to moderate the portion size of the higher energy dense foods. I have to say this advice is very similar to your dietary guidelines, Americans' dietary guidelines. This is not reinventing nutrition. This is just behaviorally trying to show how you can use the eating behavior to get the children to eat better. So obviously serving lower energy dense, nutrient-rich foods when the children are hungry without competing foods is another effective strategy. And we need to emphasize substitution, not just adding more lower energy dense foods to the diet. Substitute them for the higher energy dense foods. Make sure that they're nutrient-rich so that we can reduce the overall energy density and increase nutrient density. And finally, just how can we encourage eating behaviors that ultimately will improve children's diets? We have to build consensus on how to increase the availability and consumption of foods that provide satisfying portions with fewer calories, that are nutrient dense, palatable, and as we heard from Dr. Janowski, affordable. And we have to build consumer demand for lower energy dense nutritious foods. In the end, you know, we have to have people asking for it or it's not going to be there. And of course, the ultimate question is, can we leverage these effects that food has on eating behavior to help prevent the development of obesity? There's very little research on prevention. And I just want to leave you with this final slide, which I think shows you how you can talk to the public about energy density and how it affects the amount of food that you can eat. So both of these pictures, the one on the top shows breakfast, lunch, and dinner. If you eat higher energy dense foods that are very typical in a Western diet, you don't even get a whole hamburger if you eat that way. For the 1,600 calories that you might be eating on a diet as an adult. On the bottom, you can see for the same 1,600 calories, if you lower the energy density of the foods you're eating, adding lots of fruits and vegetables, and really eating the way the traditional Turkish cuisine that I've seen encourages you to eat, preserving your cuisine so that people continue to eat that pattern, you get 3 to 4 times more food, and it looks so much more appealing and is much more nutritious. So thank you very much.